Welcome to Stand Up for Doctors. I'm your host, Kim Downey. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to welcome Dr. Charity Hicks. Thanks for joining us today, Charity.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm super excited to have you. So I always start by sharing how we met. And
Mhm.
way back on May 3rd, you sent me a message thanking me for connecting with you. And you said, some of my favorite people are physical therapists. Have a great Monday. Cheers, Charity. So I liked you right off the bat. And then I shared my mission and that I had relatives not far from you. And then you offered some hiking tips if I was in the area and you offered to chat. So we did on May 16th. And after the call, you said you look forward to staying in touch and maybe meeting up in real life someday. So
Yeah.
then on July 20th, it was funny. You just randomly sent me a message like checking in. It was a really nice message. And then I sent you a message saying that your timing was really something because the very next week we were going to be heading, not far from where you were. And I said I was just about to send you a message, and I actually sent you a picture of my post-it note that said Charity. So you said that you'd be available to meet up, and then we did. And that was so much fun that we did it again in the fall. And then I invited you to collaborate on an article for Kevin MD, which we did. It was called Pivot from Clinical Work. Sometimes the answer is yes, and that's okay. We did that with Dr. David Fessel and Dr. Todd Otten. And yeah, so that's us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been fun getting to know you and even more fun when we gather in real life.
Yeah, I know. I love that. So by way of a bit of a more formal introduction, Charity is an ophthalmologist by training, and her current focus is as a nature-inspired physician burnout and wellness coach for introverts in healthcare.
Yeah. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. And today we'll be talking about Charity's best tip for her colleagues from our Kevin MD article. And one thing Charity said is always leave space in your life for creativity, curiosity, and play. It's remarkable where they can take you if you let them. And we can also discuss how Charity tailors her coaching for introverts. So, what would you most like our audience to know about you as we begin our conversation?
Yeah, so I would think, I mean, that's a great introduction. You've said a lot. Just a little, I'll just give a very brief story of, kind of my transition was when I graduated from medical school, I had a hunch, or I kind of knew that I
Mhm.
wouldn't be like medicine wasn't going to be my only career. I knew that I was going to want to do something else someday as well. Um, and around 2017, I would say I was going through burnout myself, and at that point, I'm like, I already know that I want to do this transition, and I started working with a coach, and I just started experimenting, and a lot of that is where that comment came from, and and so I kind of apply that when I'm thinking about working in burnout. Um, because if you can get curious,
Mhm.
then you start seeing choices and you start seeing opportunity. And I don't know if you want to intervene there, if you want me to
Yeah,
keep
yeah,
going.
so no, go ahead. Yeah, keep going.
So yeah, so with it, as Kim mentioned, I'm nature inspired. I love being in the outdoors. And so one of the things that I heard a few years back was never cut a tree down in winter. And I've always loved that saying because everything can look so dead in the winter. And then
Mm,
spring comes and you're like, oh, that tree's like doing great. And you're like, I didn't think it was gonna come back.
mm,
And so that's kind of how I approach burnout when I work with people is let's not chop the tree down right away when things aren't looking good.
mm,
Let's optimize everything. And that's where that curiosity, that play comes in. Um, and I believe in getting it as good as it can be, like making it the best it can be in the situation that you're in, and
mm,
then deciding from that point so that you're not trying to run away from a bad situation. And instead, through that curiosity and play and following your pleasure, you're actually being pulled toward something. And that may be staying right where you're at because
mm.
I know for me, in my experience, that's how I approached burnout for myself. And even though I left my clinical practice, like I had things, like I had made things really good before I left. Like I had a great team that supported me. Um, and my people that I worked with were great. And so, and I had systems in place. And so that's I think why I haven't had any regret or second thoughts about my transition, is because I know like I got it as good as I wanted. And
Mm-hmm.
I was still like, I still want to try this other direction.
Right. I think that's great. So I hadn't heard that quote, "I never cut a tree down in the winter." So I really love that. And I also love it that we do still need doctors. Like I need doctors. I think I might have said on a podcast here, but it's true. I told my nephrologist in December if he left and nobody replaced him, I would literally die. Like he orders medications that literally keep me alive, right? So I need my doctors to be happy and healthy. So we can't have everyone leaving, but I did write as the fourth in a series of articles this because sometimes you do need to leave, and there's nothing more important than your own health and and taking care of yourself and doing what you have to do for you. So I love that you say to kind of stay where you are. And actually in Dr. David Fessel, I think when we did a podcast about this article, kind of shared that like don't change your whole life or your whole world, like change one thing. And I think it's speaking exactly to what you're speaking to, like see what you can do differently now, and again make things the best you can be, because there's a lot of doctors then who have gone on to stay in medicine, to
Mhm.
find joy again in practicing medicine while they find something outside that fills their cup. So I
Exactly.
appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. As I was thinking about where am I going, I did a lot of experimentation. And I think that's so important. Like the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Anything that you do is going to involve you um having to fill requirements that aren't necessarily fun. It doesn't matter
Mhm.
what you do. And
Right.
and so I tried on different careers. I explored a lot of things inside of medicine, outside of medicine.
Mm.
Um, and and then one day I realized like, oh, like all of this, being all the things that I'm reading about, the coaching, like supporting people, empowering people, like that's the thing that like I read about all the time and get fired up. And so I knew that thing was pulling me. And there were
Mhm.
several other things that I tried on that I knew right away. I was like, that's not going to be any more fun. And there were other things that I was like, yeah, this sounded like a great idea. And once I really get into it, not so much. So that's where that is. And I think in the process of doing that, though, you also feed your outside interests and you feed
Mhm.
other parts of you, other parts of your brain, you turn those on. And so you can see like what are the things that bring me energy,
Mhm.
and what are the things that drag me down. And you can start playing with that even where you're at and trying to do, more of these things and less of other things.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. So while you were working full time, how did you have the bandwidth or the time to actually try these other things? I don't know if you want to give specific examples or just share a little general how you actually did that.
I mean, it involved nights and weekends, and I did um, decrease. I had a half day off at the beginning of the week and a half day off at the end of the week, so that gave me a little wiggle room. And honestly, that was one of the best things. Like on Monday, having a half day, because that Sunday dread that a lot of people talk
Yeah.
about. It was so
Yeah.
nice to know, like, oh, it's a half day coming in. It's like a soft landing into my week, and so
Mhm.
that's some of the things. When I talk to physicians that are still really happy in their career, I see them doing those kinds of things. Like I've talked to several physicians recently that they're in clinical practice 3 days a week, and then they're doing something else the other time. And, I was kind of thinking about that and talking about that with a physician. And, the pace of medicine is definitely increased.
Right.
And so I think, maybe when the pace was slower, being in the office 5 days a week and seeing patients 5 days a week, that worked. It was fine.
Right.
But now it's like the pace is
Yeah.
more frenetic. And
Right.
so you're doing what you did in 5 days now in 3. And
Right.
so I think if you can create those buffers, and so that's where that creativity comes in
Mm-hmm.
of, yeah, just making space and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about outside the box. Like, it doesn't have to be, just because this is the way it always was, doesn't mean
Right.
this is the way it has to be. And so for me, yeah, so I had those little half days that I could play with, and then nights and weekends is where
Mm-hmm.
I had time to
Mm-hmm.
explore.
Yeah, well, that's a great idea, and I love that half a day on a Monday for anyone that feels like they could work that out, because then you would almost half look forward to it, that would be your favorite day of the 5 days, right? If Monday could be a half day, so I think that was brilliant to do that. Yeah, so if so, some doctors, if they're just so busy and tired, they might not even have any idea like what to explore, how to even start that. Do you have any ideas or suggestions?
To me, I would say start out with hobbies and start out with things that are fun to you and that you enjoy. And it doesn't even have to be medically oriented. It doesn't, you think about when you were a kid and you just did things because they were fun. You didn't do them because they were productive or because you were making a difference in someone's life or you were making money. Like, you just did it because it was fun. And so that's where when you don't have any time and you don't have any energy, it's finding those things that do give you energy and aren't taking more away. And that's
Mhm.
one of the things that I like to, pay attention to when I'm working with people with burnout is I don't want to add more things like, oh, you have to go
Mhm.
meditate for 30 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Nobody has time. I mean, I remember when I was in 2017, kind of going through my burnout phase. And, um, you know, I would I would talk to my coach who's like, just take a breath before you go into each room. Like, I don't have time to take a breath. I gotta keep
Yeah,
moving. And so
yeah,
I try not to add in like
right.
anything that's going to feel like another obligation. And it's more like seeking out things that raise that energy level so that then you do
Mhm.
start feeling like you have a little more wiggle room
Mhm.
um,
Right.
to
And for some
to-
people, it might even be Googling the word hobbies, right? And see what sounds it that might sound like silly or stupid, but if you can't think of anything, and it might be things that you never interested you before. Like I never considered myself a writer, right? And now I have like, 13 things, and mostly collaborative now published with Kevin MD, right? So, and
yeah.
now I do have a story to tell and things to share. And but I would have never thought, like in high school, I didn't like writing. I wouldn't have thought myself as a writer. Things like that. Or then conversely, my whole life I had wanted to learn how to play the piano. We've got a piano back there. So I spent some months like taking some piano lessons, and even art. You don't have to be an artist,
No.
and you could just dabble in it through our cancer center, Ann's place, actually, the thing that's back there, and then this thing right here. I did a little art, right? And it was fun. So there could be things like you don't, and it's basically if you write something, you're a writer, and if you paint or draw something, you're an artist, right? And you could do it just for yourself. So you don't, and I wonder too, as sometimes doctors, if you're like, type A, personalities, that you might not want to start something if you don't think you're going to be like the best at it.
That's a great point because I feel like creativity, um, it definitely, brings lightness and lets you, it makes you better in every area when you let your creativity come out, right? But a lot of people feel that they creativity means being a specific way, and you can be
Mm-hmm.
creative in any way. It can be how you bake, it can be,
Mm-hmm.
how you organize your junk drawer. Like, you can be like, creativity isn't just formal art. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
painting,
Yep.
and so you can be creative. Yeah, there's just a million ways. And so that's one of the things that when I've talked with people is really exploring like the pressure that people put on creativity and
Mhm.
letting them find fun and joy and play in it rather than, oh, that's one more thing I have, like you said, I have to do right.
Yeah, yeah, right, right, right. And even taking pictures when I was going around Connecticut and, visiting every town, which I'm now doing again, with my friend. And it was just like I would take pictures. And again, I wouldn't have considered myself a photographer, right? But then doing that and like writing up the adventures, that was one way to be creative.
Yes.
And or gardening, right? I know you like you have some beautiful gardens and stuff like that, right? So it can be the flowers that you plant and tend to.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Do you have some examples of some of the things that your clients have done to express their creativity or things that they've tried that they might not have thought of before?
Yeah, some people will like draw, paint, um, just sketching, even journaling can be creative.
Mhm.
Um, music
Mhm.
and yeah, there's just a myriad of ways that you can I'm trying to think of others, but yeah, those are the ones that are coming to the top of my head right now.
Yeah, no, well, that's really terrific. So I know that you also specialize in coaching introverts. So I'm curious as to how you tailor that, your coaching, towards introverts.
Yeah, so for me, I do one-to-one coaching and I don't have like a specific program that I run people through per se. It's more come with what, and let's discuss what you need right now and then we'll deal with it. And the reason that I like one-to-one is just, a lot of introverts tend to be more private. I'm a private person, so I know I always enjoyed that close space like this conversation like you and I are having with
Mm-hmm.
everyone.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so I like to do it that way. I think it provides privacy, provides a little more safety. Sometimes it's not doesn't feel safe to kind of talk about some of those very personal things, with a group of people, especially, when groups of 100, people are like, "Oh, it's a small group."
Yeah, yeah. Me and 100
Um,
of my best friends.
yeah, exactly. And so that's my approach. And I pay a lot of attention to energy management, as you probably guessed, and as we're talking, is just, what do you, making sure that you have time to recharge. And in medicine, that can be tricky because for introverts, we recharge in solitude and in quiet. And in the clinic and in the hospital, there's not much solitude and quiet. And so finding those little spaces in the day where you can get that and
Mhm.
finding other ways um, to recharge that if when you have to be in the presence of other people, like what are other ways to recharge?
Right. Well, and I love the podcast you did with Dr. Matt Daniel, doctors
Oh,
in his
thank you.
podcast, Doctors at Work, and you actually explained what an introvert is because some people think it's like, well, you don't really like people, and that's not exactly it. Would you? And you've just touched on it, but would you like to explain a little bit more how would you would define an introvert?
Yeah, so introvert, extrovert is just all about where you get your energy. So introverts kind of go to quiet and go to solitude to gain energy. And for extroverts, it's more about being around people, and that fires them up. And so it's as simple as that. Now, there are a lot of other traits that kind of tend to go with one or the other, but at the very root of it, it's just, you know, when you've had a day and you need to recharge, where do you go? Do you go to
Hmm.
your alone space or do you go find people? And
Hmm.
that's the simplest thing. And again, we talked about this on Matt's podcast is it- most people aren't either or. There's a
Hmm.
spectrum and we're all in there somewhere. And I like to use the descriptors just for more for awareness so that you
Hmm.
can find what you need and not necessarily to put people in a box.
Sure, right. No, that makes sense. And when I was listening to that podcast, because I guess I would have always said I was an extrovert, because like I like people, I like being people, with people and talking to people. But I don't know if I'm changing as I get older or if I was a bit of an introvert and never identified myself as such, because now I feel like alone time is more important. And I would say if I need to recharge, sometimes I do need to be by myself and need that quiet time. Do you think that people sometimes change during their life, or might they just not had that awareness? Just because, like, I like to talk and be with people that I assumed I was an extrovert, but maybe I wasn't necessarily.
Yeah, I think there have been some findings that suggest that people do lean a little more introvert as they get older.
Hmm.
But the underlying trait there is generally pretty stable. But it might be like, oh, I always enjoyed my alone time, but now I enjoy it a little bit more. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the underlying trait is pretty stable.
Hmm. Okay. Well, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So, so do people, do you do it all virtually, or do do you see work with some people in person, or how does that work for you?
So currently it's virtual.
Mhm.
But I am definitely trying to figure out ways to incorporate nature more into my coaching. And so for people that are local, I would definitely take it out, go to the forest. I think when I, think of giving someone a benefit. Like if you're getting coaching, you're out in nature and you're moving, like that to
Mhm.
me seems like the triple bonus.
Yeah, exactly.
So, um, but yeah, I'm trying to figure out ways to do that virtually because just like anything, then you have tech issues, you have like the
Sure.
wind with trying to be phone or phone reception. And so,
Yeah.
but that's definitely in the works.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's exciting because I was gonna ask you, because I know that you like to incorporate nature, and I was gonna ask you to speak specifically to how you do that. So right now that it is virtual, how do you do, is it more the suggestions then that you offer your clients, like to make sure
Mhm.
that they are spending time in nature or gardening, or what all that does that encompass? Besides that, or there other things, what would you suggest to people who want to incorporate nature more?
Yeah. So I mean there you can bring nature to you or you can go to nature, right? And so a lot of times I'll focus on how do you bring nature to you, especially because we're like stuck in these clinical settings. And the studies have showed even just looking at a photograph of nature has
Mhm.
a benefit. And
Mhm.
so, like, just simple things like putting a nature screensaver or a background on your computer or having a photo, um, bringing the smells of nature in with like essential oils, things
Mhm.
like that, the sounds of nature. So, looking at ways to bring it in when you can't go out, having plants, just having green
Mhm.
around are some of the things. I have a little under my desk. It's not actual pebbles, but it's a mat that feels like my feet are on pebbles. And
Okay.
so that gives you the feeling of being outdoors. So there's lots of little things that you can do to bring it to you. And then obviously going out. And one of the things I always suggest is if you have 20 minutes for your lunch or however long you have for your lunch, go out. Get
Yes,
out of the
yes.
building, breathe in fresh air.
Right.
Like we're
Yes.
always in this recycled air all day long.
Mhm.
Just go out and get fresh air, have the sun on your face.
Mhm.
Um, Studies have shown that like just 120 minutes of nature a week
Mhm.
makes a difference in people's in health and in their mental well-being. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean like, oh, I have to go out and do 2 hours. Like, no, it could be that's like less
Right.
than 18 minutes a day that you could
Right.
like, and it doesn't have to be even in 18 minutes. You could go out for 5 minutes in the morning and just hang out. And then,
Right.
it doesn't have to be, I think a lot of times people might think like, oh, I have to go to this remote place and I have to do
Mhm.
this week-long backpacking
Yeah,
trip
right.
and live off the earth. Like, it doesn't have to be that. It
Right,
definitely can be,
right.
but it doesn't have to be.
Right, but even 5 minutes right there, because I think it can change your breathing just to get out, walk up and down the street or whatever. Actually, I even used to do that when I was in the nursing home sometimes, like, walk around the parking lot a little bit just to, like you said, get out. It changes your mindset, changes your breathing. So even 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, huh. Now do you do anything with like grounding? Like, because I understand that's kind of like walking in your bare feet. Because I know my favorite thing to do is like go to the beach, walk at the beach, in my bare feet. And there's something said about, so do you subscribe to like grounding at all?
Sure, yeah, like getting your feet in the grass or like you said in the beach. To me, like going out and being among the trees and just and even as you're walking, like touching the trees and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing the like that that's a community that
Mm-hmm.
you're part of and you're within and you're supported by.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's always that flip of also knowing like nature can support you and then you can support nature as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah. And I find mindfulness and breathing to be very important.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you, when I first started on my coaching journey, like I was like, that was a lot of woo. Like
Okay.
and
Yeah.
so and so I like to kind of bring that mindfulness and make it super easy and things that you can do on the fly. And a lot of it's just, being present to what is in your environment right now. Like even
Mm-hmm.
just like sitting for 2 minutes and
Mm-hmm.
just paying attention to what are all the different sounds that you can locate. And that's
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness. And I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times it sounds like some big thing that you have to do, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be. And again, that's one of the things that I talk about where I want to make the techniques that I give to people lightweight in terms of how
Mm-hmm.
much energy does it require to get started. I want to make it easy because then
Yeah.
the more you do it, the more you get into it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, One of my favorite things is there's something called polyvagal breathing, where
Mm-hmm.
your exhale is longer than your inhale,
Mhm,
and um, I love that. And I think if you start training yourself in times where it's not a stressful situation, then all
mhm,
of a sudden you find your body, it just starts doing it when
mhm,
when you're in a stressful situation. And so that's what I like to think of as like, what are things that don't wait till it's stressful.
mhm,
Um, Start doing these things now so that it just kind of kicks in, and that's you know,
mhm.
second
You
nature.
no, you're exactly right, and I, can attest to that from lived experience. Because during when I was going through everything, I participated in a mindfulness group, um, through our local, cancer center, and, we did, some of the breathing or, like, the 4-4-6-2, and now if I do feel stressed, I know that I can just change my breathing. So, but it's not like I tried to introduce it, well, I was really stressed out, right? It's like it just becomes part and you're like, oh yeah, I have this tool. I can use that. And the same thing when I was going for a walk, if I was like perseverating on certain things, now I know exactly what you're saying. I could say, okay, I'm going to focus on sounds. And then you just listen to, is there church bells? Because I'm fortunate enough sometimes when I go for a walk, that I can hear church bells or the birds, even if we don't know how to identify the sounds of the birds right there. Yeah. What a robin is sounds like. No. uh, or I could say, I'm gonna look. Sometimes I've actually says, well, I'm gonna look for something pretty in everybody's yard. Like in each house I pass, like what's something that I could say looks attractive in their yard. And again, for some people, initially, like it might sound silly or stupid, but it's not. Like it can get you out of perseverating, and it just again brings you into that present moment, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and then
Exactly.
even with the walking in nature, I've heard the term like forest bathing. So
Yes.
even if you think of that term when you go for a walk, it can help.
Yep.
So yeah, well, this has been fantastic, as I knew it would be. And as we start to wind down, I was wondering if you have any top tips you'd like to share for your colleagues, from seasoned physicians to medical students, or even those considering med school.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say is let yourself be multifaceted, and physicians and not, and it's not just physicians, it's anyone in healthcare, most people are geared towards doing for others. And so make sure some of the facets are just for you, and that, everything isn't about, you know, what do I need to do for others? How do I serve others? Like sometimes you get to be at the front too. And so that would be
Yeah,
my advice.
exactly, 100%. I fully agree with that. And how can our listeners get in touch with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Charity Hicks, Hix. I always say, why use three letters to do what one letter can do? So Hix. And I'm also at charityhicks.com.
Okay. That sounds great. And I had to say, people should follow you on LinkedIn because your posts are like really, really good.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that.
And I feel like you get a lot of good feedback. I think other people are really appreciating them, and you get a lot of good feedback, a lot of good dialogue and feedback. So your content is excellent. I can attest.
Oh, well, thank you. I have a great LinkedIn community. I've been very pleasantly surprised at what a supportive community there is on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I've found that as well. So, well, even though I hate to end this, but we do need to. But thanks again for being my guest today, Charity. I was so happy to have you, especially since we've gotten to meet in person. So thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim. I appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome. And in closing, to move the needle in healthcare, we all need to raise our voices and we all need to care about each other. We already know that doctors need to care about patients. Patients need to care about doctors too. So stand up, doctors, and let's stand up for doctors.